Well, crap. Okay, that's not bad actually. My name is Yosef Bechhofer. It's on the sheet, and I teach at MTA. And I've taught higher levels and lower levels. I teach primarily Gemara, but I also teach. I have taught a special course, Jewish thought through film. If you want to know some good movies you can use in order to teach Jewish thought, I can give you a list, and it's sort of someday I'd like to put out a book of folks. I don't use Jewish films mostly. I use secular films, most of them are from the 40s and 50s. One of the things that the boys tell me at the end of the year when we do have their courses that they get appreciation for black and white films, which is also my own. So if you want, we can discuss that at some point. But for today I wanted to discuss issues which our kids should be confronting, and usually don't confront, and there's an important point to make to begin with. First of all, if you look through the list, I made a list of, I think, the questions which are important. If you want to choose questions you want to deal with, because we can't get to all of them. If there are any questions that specifically I want to address, how I deal with them, but how you deal with them, so then I'm happy to make it highly interactive. But one thing I want to introduce is that the other day, Talmid and my Shir had a trip, it's a great trip to the Museum of Natural History. And when they came, I said, come back with questions on the contradiction between Judaism and science, and what you see in the museum, and they started laughing at me. They said, Rabbi, depending what they call me, who cares? Nobody cares about that anymore. It's not an issue for us. They are, for most of the kids I deal with on all levels, if they're higher levels, grades are important. If they're low levels, fun is important. For nobody is thought that important anymore. Curiosity is very difficult to generate. If you have a curious kid in your class who actually sincerely and legitimately interested in issues, then you have a great gift. So I was reminded I was a fellow Shir Farakwe, who was Rebbe there, Rabbi Fruchtan was his name, from Chaim Berlin, and he said, every Seder he does something strange, because his kids come home from school with the answers to all the questions. With all the questions, all the answers, and it says you have to recite Kadei Shisha Tinaika, so he gets on the table and starts jumping around. So the kid should ask, what are you doing, Abba? So he said, oh, now he finally asked you a question, I can actually answer it. So it's whatever one can do to arouse curiosity is very, very important and very, very significant. If you have any answers which you can share, then I think that would be very much appreciated by all of us. For the time being, I wanted to start actually with the segment which is you're most likely to get a response from, which you actually should not have put on the page where it says gender relations. It should have gone on to the other side. And those questions which we have over there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are actually the questions where you can actually get a conversation going for the most part. The other ones are much harder. So in MTA, we start with the assumption that even though the kids usually do not adhere to this prohibition, then the idea is prohibited. And of course, this is honored, as I say, more in the breach. But they do know that, and they want to know why it's forbidden. It's something which is, even though they don't intend to separate themselves, although some of them do try for a bounds of time, like for a month, 2 months at a time. It's like a couple of to try. But so when I explain, the way I explain it here, and again, in terms of the input, is that it's not an idea per se. Any relationship with between a boy and a girl, even if there is speaking, just talk, there is an undercurrent of a sexual pleasure to it. And the sexual pleasure is more manifest in the Gia, but the truth is, when Chazal said, Al-Tar B'Sichim Ha'isha, they meant that from a man's perspective, there is very likely to be a sexual undercurrent of sexual pleasure, which is why, and they can understand this, boys enjoy speaking to girls much more than they enjoy speaking to other boys, at least on a certain level. So therefore, they can understand this. They are able to relate to this. Sometimes they'll argue for a while, but usually they'll give in when you say, come on, let's be honest. And they'll tell you, no, you're right, there is some certain pleasure which you get, which you don't get when you speak to a boy. So then that's the case, we can explain then that when the Torah says, it means that this kind of pleasure is very, very negative because it occupies your thoughts all the time. It occupies your thoughts in a negative way. It leads you to have all sorts of desires. And then we get into the difference between lust and love. And this is very important for the next part, which is why is self-pleasuring frowned upon. I didn't write prohibited here because I know what the audience would be, but why it's also. And this is something which, again, I grew up kind of innocently. When I grew up, I couldn't imagine any kid speaking openly about masturbation in front of a Rebbe. I couldn't even imagine kids using the word in front of a Rebbe. But now, openly, all the time, constantly, at certain lower levels. It's something which they talk about frequently, and something which they challenge all the time to know why it should be prohibited. So the way I explain it, and again, this comes back to the point about lust and love, is based on Rav Dessa's Kunshas HaChesed. And I think the Kunshas HaChesed of Rav Dessa is a very powerful tool to use in order to deal with these issues. He does speak specifically about sexual love in the course of Kunshas HaChesed, which is the first time with Gavriel. And the point is that the world was created for the purpose of chesed. And chesed means to give. And to be, as Rav Dessa says, one has to be a no-saint and not a no-teller as much as possible, a giver as opposed to a taker. And so therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a special relationship, which is the ultimate in a giving relationship. The aver which a person has is the ultimate expression of giving. And in self-pleasure is the ultimate form of taking. That kind of pleasure which one gets out of that act is a completely egocentric, selfish act. And therefore the Torah frowns, at least, upon things where the pleasure comes from an individual's focus on oneself. And you can explain that. The way I explain is that any experience is heightened by it being shared, usually, such as people don't go to the movies alone. What's the difference? Entertainment is entertainment. No, shared experience is different. People don't go to eat at a restaurant alone. If you're out of town, you don't need a lunch. You don't go to a fancy restaurant alone. The notion of is embedded in the Bria that chesed is the ultimate purpose. And of course, there's a beautiful, beautiful piece of the Hakdama of Shimon Shari Yosef, which speaks about the entire concept of the world being based on chesed. He says that that's the focus. That's where the word kedusha is. Anybody here ever seen Hakdama to Shari Yosef? Yeah. What? Right. That's part of it. Good. Yeah. But first, that's the second paragraph, or the third paragraph. First, he says that this is the idea of kedusha. Kedusha means to devote or designate something, and Kodesh Baruch devoted himself when he created the world to being native, and we're supposed to emulate Kodesh Baruch Hu, and that is the ultimate expression of our Avodas Hashem, accomplishing kedusha, which is to be native, to be focused on others. And they can also understand it, but that leads into our question 3. Which is why teenage boy-girl relations questionable. Yeah.
Do you ever deal with the reverse side of it, which is another mahalach, which is used sometimes to sort of emphasize the fact that it's a reality, and whatever drushes we're going to give about it, it's not going to be a really difficult thing to solve. And so, like I've heard many mashkiach when Rabbanim talk about it, you have the distinction between your Judaism when it comes to this issue and your Judaism when it comes to every other issue. Because realistically, whatever the shmooze is, it's not going to be very difficult, very easy to follow. And so, in order to get them not thinking that this defines them, and this will bring them down in any sort of way in their Jewish self-confidence, to say it's very difficult. Whoever said it makes you all the bad thing is a shla, who says that whoever it was who said these ideas that to take you to the depths of Gehenna, etc., did everybody a disservice. Do you ever just take the other way and say, realistically, you know what, it's going to happen, but it's not the end of the world.
All the time, but I don't say, I say that
that's the more important hashkafa that the kids have to learn, because they've been hearing it's terrible forever. Yeah, but
that's specifically, don't put it in terms of the fires of hell and the demons which are going to surround
you. For sure.
Put it more into a philosophical perspective. And yes, but I have to tell you that in that respect, what I recommend is there's certain texts I save on my phone, which I get from Talmidim. One of them I recently erased, which was the first time I ever got curse words sent to me in a text from a Talmud, which was a fascinating text in of itself. But that one I recently erased.
And the first time?
What?
And you've been doing
first
it for
and
a while.
only time, Baruch Hashem.
You did a good job.
So I was upset that I sent him a video message by mistake, an audio message by mistake, and how he reacted. But this is from somebody who has a tremendous problem with nibble bad. He said, never in a million years would I have thought I'd make it 24 hours straight without cursing. And I don't know how you have in your places, but nibble bad is an amazing, amazing problem nowadays. the losing four-letter words is just a normal part of conversation for many of these kids. So, and I had this kid, he said, he lives in Teaneck, and he said he's friendly with his family's friendly with the Newburgers. He said once Rebbitzin Newburger, he told his mother that she was cleaning on Erev Pesach, and whatever she was cleaning, and it turned out that the mixture, the thing she was using, the formula was chametz, and she had to re-clean everything that she had cleaned. And he said to me, Rebbe, don't you think that when she found that out, she cursed? And I said, no, of course she didn't curse. And he had no concept that somebody would not curse. I mean, wow, what else do you do when you find out something like that? So, for that boy, 24 hours without cursing was a tremendous achievement. And I would say that, again, I've had Talmid in the past to say, you know what, for a month, me and my girlfriend have been at college on ourselves not to no year. So I would say, of course, don't want to say you're going to burn in hell because that's usually counterproductive. But on the other hand, don't let it go. I would say try it. Try a week. Try 25 hours. Whatever is suitable for Tom.
I guess my shaila is prioritizing. You know, is this the issue that we want to get on first about Negia with the girlfriend? I understand maybe a little bit more than this. But is this the area that we want to, you know, have a Shmiras Mitzvahs, bring Tzitzis, Damin Kavana, do a little bit more Asay Tov and a little bit less Meirah, especially with something which is so challenging.
The thing is that this is, the reason why I started with this is simply because this is a hook. In other words, because this is something which is very, very meaningful to them, you can tap into this. Tefillah really doesn't matter to them that much. It takes much more to get them engaged than matters at tefillah. Again, if it works for you, that's great. But for me, this usually works as a good entry point, and to take it from there and to build on that, and to get into the idea of chesed.
I found it helpful to introduce this whole topic by just explaining to them, according to the Torah, you should be married at 13, 14 years old. It's not the Torah's root problem as to why these problems even exist, just to understand this in society makes an issue. Now the question, what's best to deal with these issues that the Torah didn't really create? Mm-hmm. Just to show them it's not like the Torah's full and Torah's crazy, how can I make these demands? According to the Torah, you should be married, but you're 15 years old, you're married already. You know, the girls. Right. So it takes the blame, I think, off HaKadosh Baruch Hu and off the Torah and saying, well, that wouldn't put into the situation.
But you could say that not so long ago that it Steve was married at 13.
Yeah, right. And it's just really this society. These problems arise in this society. Just don't go ahead and be angry at the Torah for making demands upon you.
Some kids that is effective. I agree, and it's worthwhile to use it as a tool sometimes. But that again is in terms of the relationships and relationships. This is even again if they're Shomer which how I. Nevertheless, then they want to know why we're against these relations. And this goes back to the first point Matt said about sexual pleasure. And then what the Mitzvah Leo says, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, so I'll try to be brief, is that most secular relationships, and certainly most teenage relationships, are based on taking, not on giving. The relationship which is not bound by marriage, is not bound together by a mutual direction, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, is one which is based on taking. That's the difference between infatuation and lust and love. Love we know is ava means to give, have. So their relationship with the girl, they are not in it in order to give, and they can understand that because they know that that's the case for the most part, unless they are extremely romantic and haven't yet met somebody who's writing poetry to their girlfriend and being, that's romantic with her. Yeah.
Right. I'm just curious to know, at least in our student population, if they're ready to hear that. Meaning, they have, I think, such a misperception of themselves that I'm not sure they're able to hear that. They actually fancy themselves the romantic, even if they're not.
My experience, it could be there's something like my experience is they've been not that way. They're usually open to admit that mostly it's unless it's been going on for years.
And the girls may not view it the same way as the boys.
That's true. I tell them they're taking advantage of the girls.
I'm sorry?
I tell them they're taking advantage of the girls.
No, but the girls' perspective is that they are giving to the relationship.
That is true. And the boys are taking.
Right.
It's an important point to make, of course, which I make always early in the year, which is basically the Torah recognizes that men are animals and women are human beings, and many of the Gedorim which we have are based on that assumption. And they can relate to that as well. Although nowadays, some of the girls that they relate with, I'm not sure that's the case. But, and again, I talked about lower levels. But that is also part of it, to know that the boy and the girl have a different relationship to different things they bring to the table in the relationship, and the girl is much more likely to see it on a romantic plane, whereas the boy is just wants to get the pleasure out of it. And so that is true, regardless of what's going on in the relationship, whether Negiah or not Negiah, it doesn't matter, because that's usually the basis of that relationship. But that's why I said here I didn't mean questionable. I wrote questionable because I didn't want to say specifically it's usher. Obviously, it does happen sometimes, and it is legitimate. But by and large, for the most part, they understand, especially because they're constantly switching off girls, and the girls are part of this group. Are you on Facebook? I got on Facebook to monitor my town meeting. Again, that was an education. It still is an education, an ongoing one, as to see what goes on there. And the boys and the girls, they have this big chevron which they switch off sometimes. This one's with this, that one's with that, and so they're not exactly forming intense relationships. For some reason, number 4, homosexuality has become a big issue nowadays, and homophobia is considered to be a big avera. And one has to, of course, understand it's legitimate that people should not be racist or homophobes or anything like that of the sort, because especially in today, nowadays, when a person when everybody's a tinok shenishba, nobody can really understand because of what society has done, what the chaymer isser is, and what the problems are. But again, along the same lines, the Kadosh Baruch Hu designed a giving relationship to be based on building this house, and even if Chas v'shalom there are no children, that's the way Hashem designed human personalities, that they bond in a giving way, man and woman, and that takes more of an effort to explain, I grant you that. But there's an important Rambam on this, which I use very early in the year, which is the Rambam says I tell them always, none of them have friends. They don't have friends. And at first they get all annoyed. Of course we have friends. What are you talking about? So then I say the Rambam quotes Aristotle with 3 levels of friendship, right? He says the basic level of friendship is just to derive mutual benefits. The second, I'm being the concert, it's much more elaborate than the Rambam. The second level of friendship is where you have a friend with whom you can let your hair down and reveal your secrets and feel comfortable. And the third level of friendship is when you have 2 people bonded together, united in some sort of mission and purpose, and each one is mechazik the other. So I say, none of you reach level 3. And they always concede that point. Rare exceptions, some of them say they have 1 friend, but usually never more than 1. Some of them level 2, but again, very few. Most of them will concede that they have buddies with whom they play basketball, with whom they schmooze, with whom they text, but not that they actually have any profound, meaningful friendships. And that's, again, the idea is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu designed the world with this notion of getting to level 3. And level 3 was, although ironically, the truth in advertising, the Rambam holds not that way. The Rambam holds the relationship between a male and a female is a lower level of friendship. And the relationship between 2 profoundly intellectual people, is a much higher level of friendship.
But we don't take what Socrates went.
Sorry?
But we don't take what the Socrates went for them. They say level 3 is higher and the sexuality of it is higher.
Yeah, right. So because we believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu designed the world differently. So I have to, if I can digress for a moment. One time, many years ago, the early 2000s, I had a public debate with Rabbi Dov Linzer in Lincoln Square Synagogue about whether halacha is influenced by psychology and sociology or not. So he mentioned, one of the examples he mentioned of how halacha is influenced by psychology was that we have a machlokes between the Rambam and the places about whether women can make a bracha mitzvah seishas man grama. Rambam holds they can't, Rabbi Tam holds that they can. So he explained machlokes as follows. He said, the Rambam lived in a regressive, misogynistic Arab society, and therefore he looked at women with a lower and more denigrating perspective. Rabbeinu Tam lived in a more progressive, proto-feminist, northern Christian society, and therefore he had a much more liberal attitude towards women, and therefore he allowed them to make a bracha mitzvah seishas man grama. So obviously we don't look at things that way, but that's the fact. This Rambam reminded me that the Rambam, they had a different perspective on marriage perhaps back then than of course we have today. So which is, so next question, are women inferior to men or vice versa? Again, I tell them all the time that men, and they see as themselves, men are animals and therefore they require much more work than women do. Women are much more mature, usually, and much more human in their behavior. And this is something which in MTA probably doesn't come up as much as co-educational school. So I don't have to deal with it as much as somebody probably deal with it.
So I know one question which a lot of girls ask is, so why do we have to dress a certain way, cover our hair, not sing, in order for, it's for the men?
Because they're animals.
Okay, so why, we have to change who we are, so they should...
Well, the problem is that men are 50% of society. So if you have animals walking the street, you have to be all over the place. You have to be careful. It's a dangerous place, right? The men are dangerous. Look what happens in India. The women get raped on the street. So yes, it's true. We prefer if men don't become animals, and obviously, our ultimate goal is everybody should be about Musar and about Midas, and we had the Gemara Ksubis where the Tana, I think it's Tana Mexanor, he took the Kala on his shoulder and said, "Blame like a Kleira." Everybody should be like that, but unfortunately, the reality is we're not holding by that much radar yet. So therefore, that's important point to make, which is that what we don't focus enough on is tznius for men, which is not expressed sufficiently. Tznius for men, and also tznius in general. I always, I try and get people to think, to respond. So one of the things I say is that I think it's also on a Lexus. Why is it also on a Lexus? Because, I don't mean it literally, but if a Toyota is the same car, basically, and it gets you from place to place, so what's the hazard to buy a Lexus? What's the hazard to spend $10,000, $15,000 more on a Lexus when you can spend on Toyota and give the money to stock up, right? So that also is part of tznius. Stop with Samuah, conspicuous consumption. We don't get into it enough with our Talmidim because our Talmidim usually they can't wrap their heads around that. But it's something which we should try, I think, and I do try a little bit to get into it as much as I can.
From a co-ed perspective, the girls don't really, very often don't buy this, right? They don't buy the fact that my whole tachlis is just to not be persecuted by men, by animalistic men. Where's my avodas Hashem? What am I supposed to do? There's nothing for me to do. There's chala, there's nida, which is also, I guess, compromised a little bit by men. And what is there for the woman? And the girl will ask, Shlos Isha doesn't make any sense. Meaning, this is not reassuring when you actually speak to the girls about this. It's very, it's difficult.
I understand. Yeah, that's what I say.
Doesn't impress upon them. Oh, so pretty much I'm a target of animalistic consumption, and therefore I have to cover myself. That's my life. My life is just. There are communities who make a wall of yadus for a girl about sleeve lengths and all these things, and I think we don't do that, and I don't think we should. But it's very unsatisfying for the girls.
Right. So that reasoning, I think, going back again. If there was something you wanted me to address, I'm happy to do so too.
Are you going to address 1 and 2 top? Because what we have, and my students very often are more intellectual, more grade-minded, but also when engaged in the philosophical discussions, do ask the fundamental questions, meaning none of this matters, none of our, so to speak, apologetics matter if there's no God and if revelation isn't...
Right.
Isn't
okay, so we'll come back to that right away, but just one more thing, is that I have here, somewhere along here, the next section. Why to learn Gemara and why to not learn Gemara? And should boys and girls have different curriculums? So whenever I get asked about girls not learning Gemara, I say we destroyed the boys by teaching them Gemara. You want to destroy the girls as well. The ultimate, and I mean this seriously, the ultimate curriculum for most Jews, for most men and women, is the Beis Yaakov curriculum. The Beis Yaakov curriculum for high school is an extraordinary curriculum. What happens is you have girls who come out of high school, functional Jews. They know Tanakh, they know Halacha, they know Machshava, they know Hebrew. The boys which we produce after 4 years of high school are functionally illiterate. They know about 3 pages of Gemara, they know nothing about Judaism, they know nothing very little about Halacha, and their Hebrew things also. So and this comes back to part of the report of Rav Dessler in the third Chet Mitzvah Milion, where Rav Dessler was asked in this famous piece about Frankfurt versus the yeshivas. Anybody familiar with that piece? He says there was a Chazon Ish, the Gates said at one point in the early 50s they wanted to found a teachers' college for boys to get degrees and be able to become teachers. And Rav Dessler asked the Chazon Ish, and they said they should not do it. And he said there were 2 shittas back in pre-war Europe. There was the Shita of Frankfurt and the Shita of the yeshivas. The Shita of Frankfurt was, we give everybody more or less the same education, men and women. Not so much Gemara. We're not out to make a time with Talmidei Chachamim. We're out to make Balabatim, Yerei Shamayim, a society which functions the Shemos and Feres. And for the most part, they succeeded in Frankfurt. The Shita of the yeshivas is, we try to produce the Gdolei Torah. We don't care about the chinuch of the lower levels. We only produce the Torah, and that's why we focus on Gemara, and to exclusion of almost anything else. And it's also highly unstructured, because that's how you produce Gedolim. And he says, not without the quotes of the famous Chazal, 1,000 iknos in the mikra, echad yetzirah, and he says the two beautiful words, zeh hamachir. That's the price. And so our whole system, even co-educational institutions, is the Shita of Lithuanian yeshivas. That's why it's on Kushner. The girls got, whether girls get, if they were higher level honors, they got expanded Gemara. So, again, it goes back to this whole Lithuanian system, and this system is predicated on the assumption that most will be dropouts. And they'll find, and the way of this puts it, we don't want to be able to drop out the cover, because then that'll be an allure. We don't want them to get respectable positions. We want the ones who drop out to become petty shopkeepers, farmers, things like that, so that the intellectuals are not drawn. So because if you have an intellectual alternative, like a degree, so then you might lose the Gdolim to your degree.
Then you tell your class, now let's go back to the Gemara after you say that.
I have no choice, because that's where there's structure. I have no choice.
Where's this? Was
Saying that
that
it's not.
The third line, page 353.
Saying it's not,
Use it
not
often.
serving its purpose. So.
But I know, I wish I could start a school which was different, but nobody's willing to put in the money for that. I don't know why. That really, our entire educational system's really changed. And besides, because also they go to yeshiva in Israel, so that's the whole point in many high schools is to keep them from, and some of them until they get to Israel. And Israel's Gemara-centric also, so then the whole system would have to be changed. It's not. I can't fight City Hall by myself, but I do make it clear that I don't believe the curriculum which we teach is at all appropriate for most kids which we teach. So, but again, we're all Litvaks as part of analysis. So that's that.
You haven't addressed, though, in that approach, the more popular halachic notion that it's usher for women to learn Gemara.
I don't think it's also going to learn.
Okay.
And it's not also, it's just...
The kids will ask you that.
Right, but it's not, so for in our circles, we don't have to say it's also going to Gemara, right? If you have problems, you're more right, if a more right institution, then the question will come up anyway. But in our circles, we're not to say, we should say, it's not advisable really for most people. The mice that my wife once said to me, that my wife knows, I don't know if any of you studied on my wife, okay, so she's distinguished educator, probably much more distinguished than I am. So she said that it's true that many girls should not be. Gemara is not suitable for most girls. But I don't think you can say that nowadays. Only the Kadri Chadorim, you can't say in public. But she said, no, most girls don't have the emotional capacity of Gemara. But again, that's not saying you, so I'm just telling you that. Okay. So now let's get back there for 1 and 2. So I'm very impressed that you have kids who are into this, and Ashrecha B'Toiv Lach, you have a special gift as a result. So why do we even got? I usually show towards the beginning of the year, and I know this movie's got a lot of flack, but I'm not impressed by the flack. I usually show Expelled. You familiar with Expelled? No. Expelled is a movie by he's a famous Ben Stein, so it's a very funny movie about intelligent design, and so it's all about intelligent design. How intelligent design is excluded from the halls of learning, academia, publications, because it's not politically correct, and he shows the people advocating intelligent design as very real, significant, profound individuals, and he does it in a very skeptical way. In other words, he says, as if he's trying to get them and find and show that they're wrong. And if you go online, you'll see I try to print out there's an alternative set of subtitles, which is nasty, trying to debunk the film, but they're not aggressive. They're mostly just nasty. So and at the end of the film, there's this beautiful, priceless interview with what's his name? Richard Dawkins, right? Which really makes the case. So the truth is that goes back to Rebbe Chanan and those.
So Dawkins makes the case for God in this video.
No, he's an anti-God. That's the point. Yeah, that's the way the interview goes. I forgot to bring with me, there's a great book which you can use, which is a children's book. Look it up online, Yellow and Pink by William Steig. William Steig is famous for being the author of what book he became into, the movie Shrek. That's so the kids will know who he is because he wrote Shrek. William Steig, S-T-E-I-G. So in this book he has this whole mushel about two wood figures like painted puppets, who find themselves out on a lawn and they start asking, where do we come from? What happened? And one guy's the pro-evolutionist, and the other guy is asking all sorts of skeptical questions. And at the end, the guy who made them comes along and picks them up, and one asks the other, pink and yellow they're called, who is this guy? And the other one says, I have no idea. So the book is very, very cute, and it makes the point better than almost any other text I've ever seen. And every year I do story time with the book. And kids really enjoy it. Yellow and Pink by William Steig. And so that all goes back to Rebbe Chana. The Rebbe Chana is in Kovetz Ma'amorim in the back of the Sefer. It's all, I'm sorry, Kovetz Ma'amorim in the front Sefer, and Kovetz Aros, it's in the back of the Sefer, and Kovetz Aros and Yivamas, where he says that there is, he brings down basically the Chazal that the Beged was made out of the Oireg, and the Binyan on the Banai, or Chichal, I forget what he says, the Chazal say. And so he asked the question, why, if it's so, basically he's coming to explain, he asked several good questions, how can you possibly hold somebody 13 years old or 12 years old to be liable to be a Maimon, and if they're not a Maimon, theoretically they could be killed. The greatest philosophers have had problems with this, right? And it's not, Torah says, no, you have to believe it. And so he goes, it's totally on a tangent, but it's important just to mention it, totally on a tangent, but just came to mind. Sometimes, occasionally, I get a question about Amalek, and genocide, Mechias Amalek, I should put down here. So you all know the Rambam holds you don't kill Amalek automatically. You only kill Amalek if they don't accept Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, right? First you try to get them to keep Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, and don't put Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, so then they're killed. But it's important to know that the whole question of Amalek is only really a little bit of intellectual sophistry. But okay, getting back to this. So he says, why does it...
That's one for babies.
What?
That's one for babies. I mean, the Kasha Ram is the...
No, I'm not saying the Kasha's result, but first there's the beginning of the resolution, right? So the other part of the resolution, if we want it, I brought up...
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Rabbi Bradley Kaplan is my personal hero. If you go to my website, you'll find my writings on him. So he has a piece on Mechias Amalek, and he says, it's a very beautiful piece. He was an extraordinarily beautiful writer, and he writes about, we read it after on Shabbos. Why we on Shabbos and Parashat Mechias Amalek? Because we don't want you to act on it. We want you to know that there's evil in the world. And there's an important point to make, which is that the things happen in history which are delivered by Hashem. This is when the Assyrians were Mabal the Umos. The whole world changed. All this concept of Amalek became moot in any event, because nobody knows who Amalek is. Right? So therefore, the whole purpose of many parshas in Torah is what Chazal say in Sanhedrin, Drosh v'kabel schar. Not Drosh v'kabel schar, say cute vertach. It means learn the Musar, learn the Midos, learn that evil has to be sought out and eradicated. Learn that we have a battle against evil. Those are many parshas in Torah which are like that, especially because those don't apply this manazeh, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was misabed history this way. I want to actually mention something of this, which has to do with the later speech, the Hashgacha Prati speech. The topic, I have an uncle, his name is Rabbi Emanuel Shochet, a very big Lubavitcher scholar. So he told me once, he said, more than the revolution of the Besh, Baal Shem Tov, concerning Hasidus, he was successful in the revolution concerning Hashgacha Pratis. Because until the Baal Shem Tov came along, most Rishonim didn't believe in Hashgacha Pratis the way it's believed in today. The Baal Shem Tov was the one who actually popularized that notion. The Rebbe Rabbeinu Parshis was famous for having said, it's in Pikdamei Chasidim by Simcha Lav, which is a very good book to have. He says that if you take a stick out of sand, and you don't believe every particle of sand falls back into the hole left by that stick to a specific place designed, destined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you're not B'Kodesh. Which would make, obviously, Rambam and the others are not B'Kodesh. So the Hasidus is one really which brought about. Hasidus brought about much more revolution than Hashgacha Pratis, because many more people believe in Hashgacha Pratis than are Hasidic. So I once had a public debate with the Rebbe and MTA about this idea of Hashgacha Pratis, And I said, and I believe this to be true, that we can't know, obviously, for certainty, but if we have this concept in halacha, hu chazei amayam advar, the concept also tzadik goes b'kadosh baruch hu mekayim. So the anhaka of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the world can change. The anhaka of Hashem with the world can change, and even the hashgacha pratis did not exist as such in the time of Rishonim. If it becomes believed widely in time of the Achronim, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes along with it.
What do you have to go there for?
Right?
What do you have to go there for? Because Baruch Hu's buried yesh behind. It's got to be. Come on, what? To say the Rishonim weren't there yet? But see, it's an understanding of buried Olam. Buried yesh behind is that it's all is all that alakol. It's the only reality.
Yeah, but the problem with Rambam, and if you saw the PDF of the session this afternoon, that's not going to be the conclusion of that session. So that's just letting you know that ahead of time. So that's many things. A change of the course of history. We had the Kotzker Rebbe is supposed to have said. The Rambam says there are no shading. The Gra says there are shading. Right? So he says Eilu Eilu. When the Rambam said there were no shading, they ceased to exist. When the Gra said there are shading, they came back. Now, obviously, that's somewhat lighthearted, but there's an idea here. There's a message here, which is Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us control of the world. He gave man control of the world, and the way we control the world is the way it goes. The way Am Yisrael controls the world is the way Hashem relates to us. That's the way Kadosh Baruch Hu created. That he should come back to the Gemara, in the case of Elazar ben Horker and the Chachamim. But getting back to this, what Rebbe Chanan says, he says, basically says, Los Tzorchei Levavchem, Nechem Chazal say, Los Tzorchei Levavchem Zuminus. That's not because he says, what is Los Tzorchei Levavchem Zuminus? Minus is intellectual, not emotional. Why should we Los Tzorchei Levavchem Zuminus? So he says, no, because he says that people have negias. And people's negias are what cause them, their emotional negias are what cause them, their best interest, to deny, to reject, to not accept and not think about things properly. I mean, it's true about Sheicha. That's what Sheicha does. So any time you have a negia, and therefore, so the way Rev Noach Weinberg puts it, which is very beautiful, as he says, you have to make sure to be a judge, not a lawyer. Because a lawyer can defend any position. The moment you get into a debate, as he says, never debate, not court. If you haven't heard of them yet, you should get the Lakewood tapes of Rabbi Weinberg. They're available on the Eish Audio site. There's so much material that when in 1980 he went to Lakewood ostensibly to teach Kiyuv, but it's really taught Yiddishkeit to Lakewood University Lights. And it's an amazing series of 6 CDs, and now you get MP3, which is stunning, stunningly good. Yeah.
The problem with Rebbe Chanan is that it's literally calling anybody who does not believe in God the way you do intellectually dishonest.
Or ignorant.
They're both insulting. I understand, but
right.
that you don't find. I mean,
I'm not saying this is the only model. So I was about to get to the other model. That's one.
Okay, fine.
So now a very beautiful sefer which you should have is Otos HaMusar by Rabbi Moshe Tzuriya. Anybody here went to Shalvim? No, he was my mashgiach. He was my mashgiach in Shalvim for many years ago, and the sefer Otos HaMusar, which is available in farm stores. He has sections: Shara Hemuna, Shara Abba, Shara whatever, Zrizos, whatever, a whole bunch of Sharim. And the Shara and Emunah has 10 proofs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 10 proofs of the existence of Hashem. And he has an extraordinary list of things, the Pilei HaTeva, right? Extraordinary wonders. My favorite is the quality of water. That water, when it gets to 4 degrees Celsius, expands, right? For no reason whatsoever. The scientists tell you what happens, but scientists cannot tell you why it happens. And obviously it has to happen that way because otherwise ice would be denser than water, which all other solids are relative to their liquids. And every pond or river would freeze at the bottom every winter, and all the fish would die. That's why it freezes over the top, because water expands when it gets to 4 degrees Celsius, so therefore it's less dense and the ice rises. Again, this is a unique, when I was in 9th grade, I was in the 10th year, and I remember being taught this. It was called, chemistry teacher, it's called Ha'anomalia Shomai, the anomaly of water. That's what they call it. So I don't know in English there's such a specific name, but that's something which I quote. And he has many quotes. He has it's a wonderful source book. I don't have the time to get into it obviously, but he has again from history, from Klaisra, from Chazal, the greatness of Chazal. and many different types of proof, and it goes on for pages and pages, and then he has a whole section on Emunas Chazal, and demonstrating how great Chazal were, and that is an amazing resource. Again, that's how I learned Emunah. When I was in Shavin, I once there was a bunch of Israelis who came from Shavua Yeshiva, from some Israeli Tikkun, and they asked me to give a Chabura, and I decided, I don't know that much about Emunah. Let me learn about Emunah, so I'll be able to teach them about Emunah. So that's actually right. They didn't pick up the Sefer at the time. No, I don't know if anybody in your schools taught you about Emunah when you're growing up, about Abbas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. Nobody ever talked to me about that. Our schools don't talk about things like that, usually. I mean, schools I went to at least. So that's how I learned it on my own. And turning to Sinai. Turning Sinai is again, I'm going very quickly. Turning Sinai is all based, obviously, on Messiah. And it's important for us to know that all non-Jewish history, and this actually links into number 3 in the second section, all non-Jewish history is based on Herodotus. Whatever books are written, there's thousands and thousands of books which are written. It's all based on Herodotus. Herodotus doesn't mention the Jews at all. Obliquely mentions people in southern Syria. No mention of the Jews. So when people come and confront us with secular chronology, secular issues, there are many textbooks which are written. But they'll go back to one Greek historian. So it's one Greek historian who stands against us. Even in the matter of the dating of the 165 missing years, you're familiar with 165 missing years, when our chronology has the Korban by Rishon at 474, not good numbers. They had 586, so the 420. Thank you. So you're familiar with what Rabbi Schwab says about that? It's usher to say that, Rabbi Schwab. It's usher to say that. Why is it usher to say that? Because Rabbi Schwab says that they covered it up. And they're so successful covering it up that we don't know what happened during those years. So Chazal covered that up. Maybe everything else is a cover-up or made up. The moment you say that...
It's the Tosfos that says that in Shabbos Thomas, no?
What?
Tosfos said they made a mistake, they got a base wrong, Shabbos Thomas.
That's better, making mistakes than covering up.
Why?
Because making mistakes, made an honest mistake.
It was purposeful.
It's making a mistake.
Mistakes are worse than cover-ups.
They didn't know what day it was. It was such a crazy time.
They're both pretty bad, right? They're both pretty good.
No, I don't think so at all. I would say a mistake is not... Human beings make mistakes. And we know that, on the contrary, we have always the tradition which has the right tradition. If you have a cover-up, it means everybody covered up. Nobody was willing to tell the truth. That's terrible. It's a tremendous condemnation of Chazal. So that's why Rashav's perspective is forbidden. But the idea is... Sorry? I say, nobody has ever, who's brought up these issues, has ever actually seen a primary source. It's very hard to get to the primary sources because they're all inscribed in stone somewhere in Persia or wherever else, and it's all based on reconstruction. The Persians were not nice enough to write Xerxes reigned 500 years before the Common Era, and Artaxerxes 450 years before the Common Era. It's all based on, it's a lot of lumbus. If I can understand, if you're a historian, you might want to do this lumbus of reconstructing histories. And Emanuel Velikovsky has a whole book about how the historians got things wrong, and they duplicated Egyptian history. They took one dynasty and exactly duplicated it several hundred years later. So it's because reconstruction is always an iffy thing at best, and we have our Messiah, actually history, our historical Messiah is much stronger than anybody else's historical Messiah on tap. Even though they'll tell you the Chinese have nowhere near it. Look at Wikipedia article in China. Chinese history. It's nowhere near with any degree of authority as our Messiah. And this is important to know. We should not be. I always say not to be defensive about it. If you go out, the only things that kids learn in school where they have access to primary texts are Limudei Kodesh, some of them, and English literature. Everything else they're being fed what somebody else is telling them.
Well, in modern history, they obviously have it.
Modern. In school. No, the kids don't get it. They get textbooks.
Here we do.
Okay, whatever.
It's based on...
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a seat on this.
I'm just saying,
I'm just being the kid in the class who's going to be, isn't this a little bit disingenuous? You use Velikovsky to prove the one likud that everybody's scholar on him about, and you probably
I love Velikovsky, and I'll use Velikovsky in anything.
the Makos, he said, are entirely rational.
So what?
Okay, fine. So forget about Velikovsky. But to find the one sheet that here and there that we have to agree with until they disagree, and then we don't agree with that sheet anymore. And we claim that you can't, these are not primary sources. What do I know? Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking the entire industry and we're saying we only believe it when it agrees with us.
No, we don't believe it at all. We don't believe it. We have our industry, and we believe ours, and then it happens to be where it agrees. Oh my God, then they're right.
Really? Is that it's okay? So we didn't get the Sheish Mebrachos, but I guess I'll wait.
Sheish Mebrachos is not. It's obviously Sheish Mebrachos. Okay, we'll come back.
Yeah. Again, to this, our kids here, for instance, they're a little more skeptical is the wrong word. They look at our presentations. They're only from Chazal. After all, the physics teacher says this, biology says this. So I teach science and Judaism. I use secular sources. I'll get to at the very end. To be in classic, but there's so much good secular stuff. David Berlinski, Anthony Flew, great stuff, which blows away Doc, and they blow away. The videos, they blow away.
Berlinski's in the expel.
But you weren't looking at it.
Yeah,
you were looking at the Devil's Delusion, which is unbelievable.
Which reminds you, should all get a hold of this. It actually goes to show and tell the Asian universe by our Arabic copy, downloaded free from
free.
Right.
I mean nowadays, but
not from our perspective, right?
He means Lifkin. That's Lifkin.
What?
He means Lifkin.
Yeah. I'm saying that whatever in the large.
I know, but that doesn't bother you. Doesn't bother me. Okay, so we're talking among ourselves, right? We're not talking to an audience which is narrow-minded. We're broad-minded individuals here, right? So therefore, and it's really brilliant because he talks about Torah and science. This actually was published. There's a shorthand version of this in Immortality, Resurrection, and Age of the Universe. Book by AOJS. But here is much more in detail about how Judaism, how you should not dismiss science, how dismissing science is horrible, and it turns people off, and how science and Judaism are compatible before it gets to the whole Age of the Universe issue.
So how broad-minded are you willing to be?
Sorry?
Meaning you'll say that you're broad enough minded to say that Shishni Rishis means whatever it means. So how broad-minded, or where are your lines in presenting to the kids?
This is my I don't take pride in this, but I was one of the reasons why Slifkin got in trouble. Came back to Slifkin because, by the way, Slifkin has banned me from his blog. So things work both ways. So because many years ago in a forum which I am involved with, Vegas, I don't know if you're familiar with it, he came out and said the novel never took place. And Mark Shapiro, who actually do get along with very nicely, says that almost no academic Orthodox, which is a whole sect unto itself, believe that the Mabul ever took place. And that is the line. If we have no Masorah that the Mabul never took place, then it's not because to say the Mabul never took place.
Sometimes it did.
Right?
We have all that in the Black Sea.
But even without the evidence. That does not. So what's Lifkin's taina? Lifkin's taina is that they never found evidence that it took place. Without that, right? So obviously, Lord, you know, in a riot. So tomorrow they'll find the evidence, right? That's why I think history actually is more accurate than science for most people. Because science is constantly discovering, constantly finding out things which are true, which they thought weren't true. And science changes from generation to generation. History is, in my opinion, much more not accurate than science, although I obviously get flack for that. Which leads me actually to the...
History can be more accurate than science.
Yes, yeah, not all, obviously.
Yeah,
we have to finish, right?
I have no clue. 10:45 is the next thing. He's supposed to start 10:45.
Oh, we start late. So maybe
we start late.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to end 10:30. It's supposed to end 10:30 for a 15-minute break.
I'm sorry?
It's supposed to end 10:30 with a 15-minute break.
What do you use to term Sinai?
Sorry?
What do you use to term Sinai? Just also believe in Chazal.
You're the Masorah. In other words, we can point on unbroken Masorah. I was once present, my wife... From Tanakh, from Chazal, from many sources.
Meaning like...
It's the broken telephone booth, so to speak. Meaning, when you play telephone, it gets changed. But here it didn't get changed.
Right. But we have, especially most of it's written down, most of it.
Maratskias has this whole thing from the beginning, the Takanas and Xeris and everything starting from the beginning.
But we didn't get to Munas Chazal, right? Now we had a separate thing altogether.
Just the fact that the revelation happened.
Right.
Just the fact that it happened.
Yeah.
What do you use to...
Sorry to end the party. They want to start now.
I'm glad that.
All right, great.
These close encounters.